There is a culture that violates all the rules of modern agriculture. It produces double the potato yield without a single drop of water. Once you plant it, you will never have to buy seeds again. It transplants itself forever and survives the cold that destroys wheat. For thousands of years, it has been the ultimate guarantee against hunger throughout the world. Then we erased it, not because it was a failure. We stopped growing it because it was too successful. A crop that grows without permission and feeds without cost cannot be owned. And what cannot be property cannot generate profit. This is the story of a plant that has outlived empires and is waiting beneath your feet. The archive opens along the east coast of North America in 1605. French explorer Samuel de Champlain lands on the coast of what would later become Massachusetts. The Algonquin people greet him with a feast among the autumn maples. Among the dishes lies a knotty root they call kaishukpanak, or sunroot. Champlain tastes it and records in his diary that its flavor rivals that of the European artichoke. He fills his ship's hold with the tubers and sets sail for France with a cargo that will change history. This is the Jerusalem artichoke, a perennial plant native to the Great Lakes and eastern forests. The plant towers 8 feet above the ground, crowned with yellow sunflowers that turn to follow the sun. But the real treasure is hidden underground in the form of knobby tubers of white, purple, and gold. Long before Champlain's arrival, Native American tribes knew the secret of this plant. The Iroquois told a sacred story about how the first Jerusalem artichokes grew from the feet of the deceased Earth Woman. She sacrificed herself by giving birth to 2 sons and gave the people a culture born of self-sacrifice. Tribes from the Atlantic coast to the Great Plains planted Jerusalem artichokes once and harvested them forever. The plant spread through underground rhizomes like a network of veins beneath the earth, and a single plot fed entire villages for generations. The tubers accumulated sweetness in the form of inulin, not starch, and withstood frosts, awaiting the moment of famine. In 1805, the Lewis and Clark expedition nearly perished from starvation while crossing the winter plains of Dakota. Snow covered the frozen ground, and their provisions were running low. Sacagawea, a young Shoshone woman, saved the entire expedition with knowledge passed down through generations. She discovered underground caches of field mice, containing thousands of Jerusalem artichokes collected by the rodents for the winter. Sacagawea dug the tubers from the frozen ground with her bare hands and roasted them over a fire. Lewis wrote in the expedition journal that the roots saved their lives and tasted like roasted chestnuts. The tubers could be eaten raw, crisp like a water chestnut, or boiled until creamy soft. Indigenous peoples dried them into flour, which could be stored all winter without spoiling. Jerusalem artichokes survived temperatures as low as -30 degrees Celsius, patiently waiting in the ground for the time when people needed food. The yield of this crop astounded European explorers. A single plant produced 3 to 6 pounds of tubers per season. An acre of Jerusalem artichoke yielded more calories than wheat and surpassed corn in cold northern climates. Research conducted centuries later would confirm ancient knowledge. Jerusalem artichokes produced 64,000 pounds of edible material per acre without a single drop of irrigation. Potatoes, even under ideal irrigation conditions, yielded only 53,000 pounds from the same plot. When Champlain brought the Jerusalem artichoke to France in 1605, Europe was experiencing a food crisis. The soils were depleted by centuries of continuous cultivation, and famine struck the continent every few years. Potatoes were feared, believed to be the cause of leprosy and madness. Jerusalem artichokes spread across Europe as a way to stave off famine. The French named it topinambour after the Brazilian Tupinamba tribe, although the plant is native to North America. The Italians dubbed it girasola, meaning sunflower, a word that would later be corrupted in English to become Jerusalem artichoke. The new crop fed peasants, livestock, and even royal courts without fertilizer or special care. It was enough to plant a tuber in the spring and harvest it in the fall, leaving the fragments in the ground. The following year, a full harvest would appear on its own, as if the land had learned to feed people without their help. University trials conducted centuries later confirmed what European farmers already knew. Jerusalem artichokes produced 30,000 pounds of edible mass per acre, compared to 20,000 pounds of potatoes. In terms of caloric content, they rivaled corn, the world's most important grain crop. However, shortcomings gradually emerged that would determine the plant's fate. The tubers were small, knobby, and irregularly shaped, difficult to peel and impossible to harvest by machine. They spoiled faster than potatoes and couldn't be stored for months in warehouses, and the inulin caused severe gas in people unaccustomed to such a diet. By the mid-1750s, the potato had achieved a decisive victory in the European food system. It was larger, smoother, and easier to process, and stored more easily in cellars and warehouses. Potatoes fit perfectly into the systems being built by industrial Europe, with its markets, tax collectors, and transportation networks. Jerusalem artichokes fell into disrepair, becoming a poor man's food and animal feed. They were grown only by those who couldn't afford anything better. In North America, European settlers began calling them a weed and preferred familiar crops from the Old World. The settlers chose wheat and potatoes, crops whose seeds had to be purchased annually. These were plants that could be controlled, taxed, and turned into commodities. Jerusalem artichokes survived only in ditches, on roadsides, and in forgotten corners of farms, but they were no longer cultivated or valued. The plant simply bided its time underground, spreading through its rhizomes without human permission. It didn't disappear, but it became a ghost of its former glory. Few remembered that this weed had once fed entire nations and saved them from starvation. The forgotten plant's first test came with the war. In 1914, World War I began, and Germany found itself encircled by an Allied naval blockade. By the winter of 1916, the country faced a catastrophic famine. The winter of 1916 went down in history as the turnip winter. Potatoes in Germany turned black from frost, and food imports were blocked by warships. People ate rutabagas intended for cattle because there was nothing else left. Thousands of Germans died of exhaustion on city streets, but some survived thanks to Jerusalem artichokes. The forgotten plant grew wild in abandoned fields and wastelands, undetectable by any means. People dug the earth with their bare hands, searching for the tubers patiently waiting beneath the snow. However, World War II proved a true test for Jerusalem artichokes and human memory. In 1940, Nazi troops occupied France and seized 80% of all food supplies. Potatoes, meat, and grain were sent to German soldiers, leaving scraps for French families. For 9 years, millions of French people survived on Jerusalem artichokes, rutabagas, and vegetables once fed to pigs. People learned to hate these tubers for their small size, difficulty in peeling, and the terrible gas they produced when consumed daily. Nevertheless, Jerusalem artichokes kept children alive when everything else disappeared from the shelves. The Nazi starvation plan systematically removed food from occupied territories, condemning the local population to a slow death. But the Jerusalem artichoke could not be completely controlled. It was too hardy and wild, too widespread in abandoned areas. In the Netherlands, the winter of 1944 became the winter of famine. 22,000 people died of starvation when the Nazis cut off food supplies as punishment for a railway workers' strike. The government secretly published emergency cookbooks with recipes using tulip bulbs, tree bark, and Jerusalem artichoke. Dutch families dug the frozen earth with their bare hands, searching for any edible tubers. Mothers taught their children to identify Jerusalem artichokes among tree roots and rocks. Every tuber found meant another day of life for the exhausted family. After the liberation in 1945, survivors categorically refused to eat Jerusalem artichokes. An entire generation of Europeans associated this vegetable with death, occupation, and the worst years in human history. In France, grandparents who survived the war banned it from their family tables. The plant that saved millions of lives became a symbol of suffering and humiliation. Jerusalem artichoke disappeared from markets, cookbooks, and the collective memory of entire nations. Seed producers stopped growing it. Chefs forgot their recipes, and farmers avoided planting it. However, the war could not change the biological nature of the Jerusalem artichoke or its nutritional properties. The tubers still contained 73 calories per 100 grams, 2 grams of protein, and 429 milligrams of potassium. Iron, copper, magnesium, and B vitamins filled every cell of the plant, awaiting the day when people would remember this forgotten treasure. The true strength of Jerusalem artichoke lay in its inulin, which made up 50 to 60% of the tuber's weight. It is one of the richest natural sources of inulin on Earth, and its properties were radically different from those of ordinary starch. Inulin passed through the stomach undigested and reached the colon intact. Beneficial gut bacteria, especially bifidobacteria, utilized inulin as food and began to proliferate. They produced short-chain fatty acids, reduced pH, and inhibited the growth of pathogens. These processes also helped the body absorb calcium and magnesium, which would otherwise be lost. Medical research in the 1980s confirmed what our ancestors intuitively understood. Jerusalem artichoke reduced constipation, boosted immune function, and could prevent certain types of cancer. Unlike potatoes, which spiked blood sugar levels, inulin was slowly converted into fructose. Diabetics wrote letters to medical journals, reporting that daily consumption of Jerusalem artichoke reduced their insulin requirements by half. Folk medicine received scientific confirmation, but the world had already forgotten about this plant. Pharmaceutical companies couldn't patent something that grew naturally in any garden. The plant healed not only people but also the soil beneath its roots. Jerusalem artichoke's perennial nature eliminated the need for annual plowing, preventing soil erosion. Its deep roots broke up compacted soil layers and improved its structure for years to come. Jerusalem artichokes withstood drought, poor soil, and temperatures down to minus 30 degrees Celsius, where annual crops simply perished. The plant was designed by nature to survive in chaos and thrived in conditions that would destroy wheat and corn. Its resilience seemed almost supernatural. In the 1960s, Californian wholesaler Frida Kaplan faced a problem that was killing her sales. The name Jerusalem artichoke was misleading, as the plant bore no relation to either Jerusalem or artichokes. The Italian word girasole, meaning sunflower, was a corruption of the English pronunciation. Kaplan renamed the Jerusalem artichoke sunchoke and registered the trademark in 1980. She packaged the tubers in 1-pound bags with recipes and flavor descriptions. Sales soared 600% almost immediately. Chefs at San Francisco's finest restaurants discovered the nutty, sweet flavor of Jerusalem artichokes. The tubers were crispy when raw and creamy when cooked. Restaurants began serving Jerusalem artichoke soups, fried side dishes, and fluffy purees. But something more significant lurked behind the culinary revival. In the 1980s, an agricultural crisis erupted, and Midwestern farmers were going bankrupt en masse under the pressure of the corporate system. Some decided to undertake radical experiments with forgotten crops. Farmers began cultivating Jerusalem artichoke as a multifunctional crop for food, feed, and biofuel production. Its high yield, perennial nature, and the ability to produce ethanol from fermented inulin made it ideal for independent farming. Some saw this as a way to free themselves from corporate seed and fertilizer supply chains. The experiment failed economically due to a lack of markets and processing infrastructure. Farmers lost money, finding no buyers for their unusual produce. But the idea of food self-sufficiency through sustainable crops survived and continued to spread among alternative communities. In France, decades after the war, a new generation of chefs began to bring Jerusalem artichoke back to the table. They presented it as part of the forgotten vegetables movement, a symbol of culinary heritage rather than the suffering of war. These young chefs did not carry the traumatic memories of their grandfathers. By the 2000s, Jerusalem artichokes had appeared at farmers' markets across North America and Europe. The permaculture movement hailed them as the holy grail of sustainable farming. A single planting promised an endless harvest without the expense of seeds, fertilizers, or annual tillage. Modern scientists are studying Jerusalem artichoke as a crop for marginal lands unsuitable for traditional agriculture. In the face of climate change, when droughts and extreme temperatures are destroying wheat and corn, Jerusalem artichoke patiently bides its time. It was born for chaos and designed by nature to survive in extreme conditions. But why aren't we seeing Jerusalem artichokes everywhere yet, if they surpass traditional crops in so many ways? Industrial agriculture demands absolute uniformity from plants, which must ripen according to a strict schedule. Crops must be harvested by machines, transported without damage, stored for months, and look perfect under the fluorescent lights of supermarkets. Jerusalem artichokes categorically refuse to meet these requirements. The tubers ripen at different times, spoil quickly after harvesting, and conventional potato harvesters lose half the harvest. The roots are too shallow and cling too tightly to the mother plant. Efficient harvesting of Jerusalem artichokes requires specialized equipment or manual labor. Neither solution is scalable for industrial production and does not generate sufficient profits for large agricultural corporations. The system selects crops that are suitable for machines, not humans. The inulin problem is exacerbated in a world of instant consumption. What makes Jerusalem artichoke nutritionally superior also causes unpleasant gas in those unfamiliar with it. Gut bacteria need time to adapt to a new type of food, but modern food doesn't tolerate periods of adaptation. The nickname Devil's Jerusalem artichoke has become a running joke among gardeners. Even the famous Julia Child wrote in a cookbook, wondering about a solution to the flatulence problem. There is a solution. Longer cooking converts inulin into fructose, and small servings allow the body to gradually adapt. However, patience runs counter to the logic of the industrial food system, which demands instant consumer gratification. Therefore, Jerusalem artichoke remains a niche crop of farmers' markets and home gardens where it spreads uncontrollably. It is precisely this uncontrolled spread that reveals the true nature of the conflict. Jerusalem artichoke is virtually impossible to eradicate without chemical poisons, as any remaining root fragments sprout into new plants. In Europe, it is officially designated an invasive species when it grows beyond designated areas. Invasive is becoming a code word for plants that thrive without human permission. We use the term invasive to describe things that remind us of the illusory nature of control. Jerusalem artichokes teach us what empires strive to bury. True abundance doesn't require centralized control. Perennials return year after year without the need for seeds, chemical fertilizers, or corporate permits. They adapt to local conditions, survive disasters, and continue to feed people even after the collapse of civilizations. But crops that survive without constant profit pose a threat to the modern economic model. Jerusalem artichokes outperform potatoes in yield, heal degraded soils, and feed communities without intermediaries. It can't be patented, it can't be owned as property, and it doesn't generate consistent income for corporations. Therefore, the system labels it primitive, difficult to cultivate, and unsuitable for the modern world. This pattern repeats itself with alarming regularity throughout the history of agriculture. Amaranth was banned by the Spanish conquistadors for its sacred significance in Aztec rituals and its ability to feed peoples without dependence on colonial control. Tepary beans disappeared because harvesting machines couldn't handle their varied sizes and ripening times. Mesquite was cut down for cattle pasture, even though its fruit had fed desert tribes for thousands of years. Medicinal beans have been replaced by synthetic drugs that cost $500 for something that grows free in every garden. Indigenous crops that ensure food sovereignty are being systematically erased from history. They are being destroyed not for ineffectiveness, but for being overly successful without corporate oversight. Jerusalem artichokes survived thanks to their biological invulnerability, but most people alive today have never tasted them. They haven't seen them grow, and they don't know that planting 3 tubers in the fall yields 30 in the spring. This knowledge lies underground, ready to return when industrial systems fail. Climate change is coming with droughts, floods, and temperature extremes. Crops that feed 8 billion people were bred for the climatic stability of the 20th century. That stability is ending, but the Jerusalem artichoke was bred for chaos long before the advent of modern civilization. It stores energy deep underground, where drought can't reach it. The plant survives frosts that kill potatoes and outperforms corn in yield, using a third of the water. When conventional systems fail, the Jerusalem artichoke will be ready just as it has been for 4 centuries. French families survived 9 years of occupation by subsisting on the hated Jerusalem artichoke, cursing every tuber they ate. Dutch mothers dug through the frozen earth with numb fingers, searching for roots for their starving children. Native Americans called it kaishuk panak, the sunroot, a gift from the earthwoman's self-sacrifice. Names changed depending on language and era. Memories were erased by wars and time. But the plant never disappeared completely. Perennial and underground, it patiently awaited hands willing to dig the earth. We did not lose the Jerusalem artichoke to disaster or disease. We simply forgot its existence, choosing convenience over sustainability and profit over abundance. However, oblivion is not the final death sentence for living systems. Knowledge lives on in the soil itself, in every wild spot where a plant has taken root, in every escaped tuber that sprouts without permission, and in every gardener who accidentally discovers the magic of propagating by rhizomes. This plant teaches through perseverance and through a categorical refusal to disappear from the world. It shows that true abundance has always existed within our reach. Abundance grew in the earth free of charge, awaiting the moment when humanity would remember its forgotten allies. Jerusalem artichokes continued to grow beneath our feet, in abandoned corners of farms and urban wastelands. They reproduce secretly, spreading through rhizomes and prepare to return to humanity's diet. Today, scientists are studying Jerusalem artichoke to restore degraded lands and create sustainable food systems in the face of climate chaos. Research shows that the plant can grow in saline soils, tolerate extreme temperatures, and produce biomass where other crops simply die. Its roots penetrate deep into the subsoil, restoring fertility to depleted areas. Small farms in Canada and the northern U.S. are beginning to grow Jerusalem artichokes as an insurance crop against crop failures of staple grains. When frosts destroy potatoes and drought ruins corn, Jerusalem artichokes continue to grow and accumulate nutrients in their tubers. Farmers call them the crop of last resort. The urban gardening movement is discovering Jerusalem artichoke as an ideal plant for beginning gardeners. Planted once in the spring, you can harvest every fall without any extra effort. The plant requires no watering in most climates, requires no fertilizer, and is self-protective against most pests. In developing countries, Jerusalem artichoke is being studied as a solution to food security in regions with unpredictable climates. African researchers are testing the plant's adaptation to local conditions, and Latin American farmers are returning to growing their ancestral crops. The revolution begins not in the laboratories of agricultural giants, but in the small gardens of people who plant 3 tubers and reap 30. Each such garden becomes an act of resistance to a system that has turned food into a commodity and the fertility of the soil into a source of corporate profit. Jerusalem artichokes are making a comeback through a network of people who share tubers with neighbors and pass on ancient knowledge to new generations. Each planting becomes a seed of food sovereignty that can survive economic crises and climate disasters. The plant teaches patience, resilience, and faith in the earth's ability to feed its children. Some call this movement a return to primitive agriculture, but Jerusalem artichoke represents a technology more advanced than any industrial system. It harnesses solar energy, regenerates soil, and produces food without external resources. This technology has worked for thousands of years without breakdown or modernization. Modern science only confirms what indigenous peoples intuitively understood. Perennial crops create resilient ecosystems, while annual crops destroy them. Jerusalem artichokes build fertility year after year, while industrial monocultures deplete the soil and require ever more chemical crutches. In laboratories, breeders are working on new Jerusalem artichoke varieties with larger tubers and improved shelf life. But the plant's most important qualities require no improvement: its ability to feed people without the system's permission. This ability makes Jerusalem artichoke a danger to those who control the planet's food supply. The story of the Jerusalem artichoke continues in every garden where it is planted, defying supermarket logic. It lives in every family learning to cook forgotten dishes, and in every child digging tubers from the ground for the first time. The plant awaits the moment when humanity is ready to remember its union with the earth, based not on coercion, but on mutual care. Perhaps this moment is already approaching, as young people leave cities in search of a meaningful connection to the land and real food. They find Jerusalem artichokes growing wild in abandoned plots and discover a taste their great-grandmothers knew by heart. Each such discovery becomes a thread that binds together a broken chain of knowledge. Fine dining restaurants are once again including Jerusalem artichoke on their menus, but now not as an exotic delicacy, but as a symbol of a return to the roots of culinary tradition. Chefs are studying ancient recipes and creating new dishes that reveal the true potential of this forgotten vegetable. They are teaching diners to appreciate what grows beneath their feet. The climate crisis is forcing scientists to rethink the foundations of modern agriculture and seek solutions in plants our ancestors have already proven themselves over time. Jerusalem artichoke is on the list of future crops, alongside amaranth, quinoa, and other superfoods that once formed the basis of nutrition for entire civilizations. But the true future of Jerusalem artichoke lies not in industrial plantations or global food chains. Its future lies in millions of small gardens where people grow food for themselves and their communities. In a world where the plant, once again, becomes an ally, not a commodity, a story that began in the forests of North America thousands of years ago continues today in every tuber planted in the ground. The Jerusalem artichoke remembers a time when abundance was the natural state of the world, and it patiently waits for us to be ready to remember it. Each tuber in the soil stores not only nutrients, but also the memory of a time when food grew without coercion, and the earth yielded a harvest out of gratitude, not fear of chemical whips. Jerusalem artichoke reminds us that true security comes not from controlling nature, but from understanding and following its laws. Perhaps the most important lesson of the Jerusalem artichoke is that extinction doesn't always mean death, and oblivion doesn't equal final loss. Plants wait in the soil, knowledge slumbers in old books, and the wisdom of ancestors lives on in the genetic memory of seeds. All of this can return when the time is right. Today, as the industrial food system reveals its fragility and the planet's climate becomes increasingly unpredictable, Jerusalem artichoke offers a path back to sustainability through a partnership with plants that know how to survive. Not a path back to the past, but a path to the future, grounded in ancient wisdom. Those who plant Jerusalem artichokes today become keepers of this wisdom and a bridge between lost knowledge and future generations. They are returning to the world a plant that can nourish people, heal the earth, and remind us that abundance is inherent in the very nature of life. The story of the Jerusalem artichoke is not yet over, for the plant continues to grow, reproduce, and wait beneath our feet, in every forgotten corner of the earth, in every garden where it is planted with hope, and in every dish prepared with gratitude for nature's bounty. This sunny root of indigenous peoples is ready to once again become an ally of humanity, when we are ready to receive it.